Here's a summary of the first Screwtape letter, main themes, jargon, and real life. Wormwood is told not to be overly concerned about his patient's reading, nor whether he sees a friend who is a materialist. Don't let the patient think about things as true or false. Wormwood needs to use jargon rather than argument as a way to fuddle him. Don't let the patient focus on universal ideas, that is, things outside of himself. Humans are enslaved to the pressure of the ordinary and have a difficult time believing in the unfamiliar because they are preoccupied with what they see and hear around them. The theme of real life is introduced, raising the question of whether or not other material things can be considered real. Mentioned again in Letter 30. Science is presented as an area that can be used to defend or support Christianity. Letter 2. Main theme, appearance versus reality. The patient is now a Christian. The devil will try to use one's old habits to hinder thought life and actions. The church, or rather the traditions, and the people that make up the local church body can often get in the way of someone growing as a Christian. One's own pride, a self-righteous attitude, can also do the same. Our expectations are often used against us, dreaming aspirations to laborious doing. There will always be dryness in a Christian's life. Satan tries just as hard to keep things out of our mind as he does putting things in it. Here's a summary of the third Screwtape letter. The main theme is mutual annoyances to prevent spiritual growth. God gradually changes a person during this time Satan tries to get a foothold on what he can. Screwtape offers 4 tips for making sure mutual annoyances occur. First, keep his mind on the inner life, so he will neglect the obvious. Make his prayers innocuous by keeping them spiritual. Secondly, ignore her physical needs and only pray for things that does not bug him. Use the tone of voice and facial expressions to annoy. Third, use a double standard, where he will make an oversensitive interpretation of what others say and do, but expect his words and actions to be taken at face value. And finally, Wormwood is told to make sure he milks any jealousy the patient's mom has about his conversion and references the story of the prodigal son. Here's a summary of the fourth Screwtape letter. The main theme, prayer, a painful subject. Addresses the painful subject of prayer. When you can't keep them from praying, there are ways to make them ineffective. The best way to do this is to have an immature Christian practice prayers that have a superficial resemblance to the prayer of silence that more advanced Christians use. Bodily position in prayer does matter. Make prayer ineffective by focusing it away from him and towards themselves. Example, try to feel brave when praying for courage. There's a subtler weapon, keeping humans from having a clear picture of who God is. Here's a summary of the fifth Screwtape letter. Overall theme, using fear and suffering. The themes of death and suffering are introduced in the context of the European War. Terror pictures of the future or having anxiety about the future is mentioned. Screwtape warns Wormwood that his chief aim is undermining faith and preventing the formation of virtues. The war is entertaining to demons, but Wormwood needs to consider how to use and not how to enjoy the war. States that the enemy allows the short misery of his favorites and that suffering is an essential part of the Christian faith. Contented worldliness is difficult during times when there is the continual remembrance of death during a time of war. The sixth Screwtape letter includes specifics about anxiety, maximum uncertainty, and contradictory pictures of the future. Humans should be concerned with what they do and not on what will happen to them. We try to deal with all possible outcomes in life, but are only promised strength for the present and actual suffering. A new spiritual law or general rule introduced. In all activities of the mind which favor our cause, encourage the patient to be unself-conscious and to concentrate on the object, but in activities favorable to the enemy, bend his mind back on itself. Screwtape contrasts imaginary benevolence and real malice. Make the patient feel sorry for those he doesn't know, but feel angry towards those around him. Speaks of humans as a series of concentric circles, from the outside in, fantasy, intellect, and will. Wormwood is told to keep all the virtues outward. Here's a summary of the 7th Screwtape letter. Main theme: Devil in red tights? Do devils exist? Screwtape wants individuals to disbelieve in their existence, at least for now. In the future, he hopes to produce the materialist magician. Hell wants the church, universal, to be small and for there to be factions in it. Referencing the 5th letter, he says that for now, all extremes except extreme devotion to the enemy, that is God, are to be encouraged. Patriot or pacifist? Ideally, creating an emotional crisis and making one an uneasy convert to patriotism is best, but Wormwood's patient may serve hell best as a pacifist. Either extreme makes a person's faith valued chiefly because of the excellent arguments it can produce in favor of whatever cause they are interested in. Here's a summary of the 8th Screwtape letter. Overall main theme: Law of Undulation. Introduces the law of undulation, which is the repeated return to a level which they repeatedly fall back, a series of troughs and peaks. This is a natural phenomenon, according to Screwtape. Simply stated, it means that people go through ups and downs in life. Wormwood is told that the enemy uses periods of dryness and dullness to draw humans closer to him. Wormwood must figure out what use the enemy wants to make of it and then do the opposite. Why doesn't God make his will known more and thus override a human will? This is against his very nature and the free will he has given us. Hell is in the greatest danger when a person doesn't really want to do God's will and he doesn't sense his presence, yet he still obeys. Here's a summary of the 9th Screwtape letter. Main themes: exploring the troughs and going through phases. The theme of the law of undulation is continued from the last letter. Focuses on how Satan can exploit the low points or the troughs in one's life. When you are down or depressed, this is when sensual temptations are the hardest to resist. Even so, the pleasures in life were all created by God. All Satan can do is to encourage the humans to take the pleasures which our enemy has produced at times, or in ways or in degrees which he has forbidden. Screwtape tells Wormwood to use the patient's own thoughts about the dry point in his life against him, make him think that just as the excitement surrounding his conversion should have continued, this dryness will continue. Likewise, make the patient think he was only going through a religious phase, which he has now emerged from. Here's a summary of the 10th Screwtape letter. Main themes: new acquaintances, vanity, and puritanism. Tripweez is introduced. He is a demon who provided information to Screwtape about some new people Wormwood's patient had met. These new friends should have just the impact the devils want. Wormwood is effectively using vanity to have his patient subtly commit himself to fashionable ideas. Worldly vanities are rarely preached against, and many regard these prohibitions as puritanical. The patient considers himself to be the complete, balanced, complex man who could enjoy both worldly friends and his religious ones and live two parallel worlds without seeing any inconsistency. Here's a summary of the 11th Screwtape letter. The types or causes of human laughter are joy, fun, joke proper, and flippancy. Laughter that is the result of joy is the purest. It can be observed between people who are happy to see each other after being apart for some time. It is known in heaven and not understood in hell. Fun is related to joy and generally has an innocence that Screwtape distrusts. It promotes charity, courage, and contentment. At times, it may be used to distract a person from what God wants them to do or feel. The joke proper, or humor, is a much more promising field to Screwtape. It can include, but does not only deal with, indecent or bawdy humor, which result are frequently dissatisfying. Overall, the joke proper turns on sudden perception of incongruity. It is invaluable as a means of destroying shame. Wormwood is directed to encourage flippancy because it builds up around a man the finest armor plating against the enemy and deadens the intellect. With it, the joke is always assumed to have been made. Flippancy shows a lack of respect. 12th Screwtape letter. The patient is in a backslidden condition, and Wormwood is told to avoid making him aware of this. When Satan is successful in keeping a person unaware of their real backslidden position, one has a vague though uneasy feeling and actually avoids thinking about the Lord and will dislike duties that are religious. Screwtape also notes he will dread nothing so much as effective contact with the enemy. As the dim uneasiness progresses, Wormwood is told that he won't even have to provide pleasures as temptations, for the patient will welcome any distraction to keep him from doing the things he knows he needs to. Notes that it doesn't matter if the behaviors are only very small sins, and that spectacular wickedness isn't needed. The only thing that matters is the extent to which you separate the man from the enemy. It does not matter how small the sins are. Here's a summary of the 13th Screwtape letter from my book, C.S. Lewis Goes to Hell. Main theme, 2 real positive pleasures. Wormwood is confronted to face the reality that he let the man slip through his fingers, resulting in a second conversion. Screwtape gives him a lesson in pain and pleasure, noting that humans must not be allowed to have any positive pleasures. The patient should not do something for its own sake. Instead, he should do things that are best, right, or viewed as important. In order to recover from this mistake, he must try to get his patient to do anything but act on his renewal of faith. 14th Screwtape letter. Main themes: humility, opinion of your own talents. The patient no longer looks for an endowment of grace for life, but must instead be willing to accept the fact that God will only meet his needs each day or only each hour's needs. The main topic is humility, how Satan can twist it into his advantage. Humility turns one's attention away from self to God and to others. Humility is self-forgetfulness. Humility is not having a low opinion of one's own talents and character. Screwtape notes, a man is not usually called upon to have an opinion of his own talents at all, since he can very well go on improving them to the best of his ability without deciding on his own precise niche in the temple of fame. Here's a summary of the 15th Screwtape letter. Main theme: past, present, future, and eternity. Screwtape reminds Wormwood 2 things God wants mortals to attend to: eternity itself and the present. The benefit of living in the present is that in it alone freedom and actuality are offered. Hell wants a person to either live in the past or in the future. The future is especially useful, for it is the least like eternity. We're also told nearly all vices are rooted in the future. A proper focus on the future is for planning acts of justice or charity. A contrast of anxiety versus hope is presented. 16th Screwtape letter. Main themes: finding the best church, Vicar and Father Spike. Wormwood can cure his patient of attending church by convincing him to do what is sometimes called church hopping. Screwtape notes God doesn't want a person to be a critic of a church, but there are times when a critical attitude is necessary. 2 churches are described for the patient to consider. One has a vicar who is always watering down the faith. The other has Father Spike, who confuses his members because of the range of his opinions, fueled by hatred. Screwtape mentions the Apostle Paul in an allusion to 1 Corinthians 8 that explores the issue of food sacrificed to idols. Here's a summary of the 17th Screwtape letter. Main theme: 2 types of gluttony. Screwtape tackles the topic of gluttony. Instead of focusing on the typical excess angle most associated with it, Wormwood learns about gluttony of delicacy. An example is given of the patient's mother and refusing food at restaurants because the portion is too big. We learn about how it is different with males because they are best turned into gluttons with the help of their vanity. Chastity is discussed in relation to how gluttony can be used as a kind of artillery preparation for attacks on it. Here's a summary of the 18th Screwtape letter from my book, C.S. Lewis Goes to Hell. Main themes: abstinence, monogamy, and marriage. The whole philosophy of hell is 1. One thing is not another thing. 2. Oneself is not another self. 3. What one gains, another loses. 4. To be means to be in competition. Screwtape believes the enemy's philosophy says the good of oneself is to be the good of another, and that it has to do with something called love. Marriage is contrasted with the often distorted emotion of being in love. The humans are to be encouraged to regard as the basis for marriage a highly colored and distorted version of something the enemy really promises as its results. Here's a summary of the 19th Screwtape letter. Main theme: God's love is impossible. Screwtape tries to explain away comments in his letter that have an appearance of heresy. Wormwood gets some clarification about hell's perspective of God's love and is told that it is an impossibility. The patient being in love doesn't matter unless it can be used to draw him away from God. Screwtape tells his version of the fall of Lucifer. Here's a summary of the 20th Screwtape letter. Main themes: a desirable marriage and 2 imaginary women. The patient learns a dangerous truth that he doesn't have to yield to temptation to get rid of it. As a result, Wormwood can no longer directly attack the patient's chastity. Therefore, he must try to get a desirable marriage from hell's perspective. Poets and novelists are mentioned as useful tools to promote hell's purposes. 2 types of imaginary women are described. 21st Screwtape letter. Main theme: ownership claims. Wormwood can try a secondary attack on the patient's irritability or bad mood when trying to use a primary attack of sexual temptation. The patient can be angered by misfortune if it is considered an injury. Humans must be tricked to assume their time is their own and not a pure gift. This can lead to a distorted view of ownership, especially as it relates to having control over what one does with time. Wormwood is to make sure humans are not aware of the different senses of the possessive noun my. Here's a summary of the 22nd Screwtape letter. Main themes: patient in love, music versus noise. Wormwood's patient is now in love. Screwtape is upset with Wormwood over a visit from the secret police due to unguarded expressions found in the letters. The patient is in love with a serious Christian who sickens Screwtape. The woman's home has a deadly odor that even the pets are tainted with. Screwtape notes his hatred for music and silence along with his preference for noise. As he gets increasingly upset, Screwtape turns into a large centipede and Toadpipe finishes the letter. Here's a summary of the 23rd Screwtape letter. Main themes: corrupt spirituality, historical Jesus. The patient is spending more time with very intelligent Christians. Because spirituality can't be removed from his life, the only thing left to do is to corrupt it. This can be done by having them consider the old trick of having him focus on the historical Jesus, which is actually unhistorical, as it suppresses some points and exaggerates others. Wormwood must try to destroy the devotional life of his patient. He should persuade his patient to treat Christianity as a means to promote a cause. 24th Screwtape letter. Main themes: spiritual pride, inner ring. Slum Trumpet is introduced as the demon in charge of the patient's girlfriend. She has a small defect that might be exaggerated to become spiritual pride. Screwtape refers to the love between the two as erotic enchantment. The patient is getting closer to his girlfriend's circle, Pride can be used to have him seek to be in the inner ring of this circle. Here's a summary of the 25th Screwtape letter. Main themes: Christianity and change and horror of the same old thing. Nearly a dozen years before the book Mere Christianity is published, Screwtape uses the expression to refer to the group of people Wormwood's patient associates with as having a bond that remains mere Christianity. Wormwood is advised on how to use the horror of the same old thing as a means to unbalance the love of change and the love of permanence that humans have. This is accomplished by trying to get his patient to develop a demand for absolute novelty. Wormwood must try to get his patient to ask questions that are unanswerable instead of very simple questions. 26th Screwtape letter. Main theme: unselfishness versus charity. Because Wormwood's patient is in love, Screwtape advises him how seeds can be sown now that grow into hatred a decade later. Screwtape discusses unselfishness, a term that is used in place of the more positive charity. He explains how men and women approach being unselfish differently. This leads to a description of a game called the Generous Conflict Illusion. Here's a summary of the 27th Screwtape letter. Main themes: more prayer problems, historical point of view. Wormwood has been using distraction ineffectively, as evidenced by his patient using prayer to overcome it. Screwtape warns Wormwood that even sin, if it has the total effect of moving a person close up to God, is of no use to the devils. Efforts must be made to raise intellectual difficulties about prayer. Issues of time in relation to present, past, and future are revisited. A concept is brought up that Lewis would later call chronological snobbery in his spiritual autobiography, Surprised by Joy. Screwtape calls this concept the historical point of view. It is the notion that ideas from previous generations are useless because they are old, and thus out of date. Here's a summary of the 28th Screwtape letter. Main theme: keeping the patient safe. Screwtape has to spell things out about death to his nephew. Death isn't really a prime evil, and survival isn't the greatest good, but that is what the devils want humans to believe. Even though the patient's mom and girlfriend are pleading for his safety, Wormwood is also to be on the lookout for it. That's because if his patient grows older, there is a possibility his middle years will lead to prosperity, which can make him feel more at home in the world. Here's a summary of the 29th Screwtape letter. Main theme: cowardice, courage, or hatred. With the war intensifying, the issue of courage or cowardice is reviewed. Screwtape moans that the devils can't create any virtue, yet virtue is necessary for someone to be greatly and effectively wicked. Hatred is a vice they can use effectively, especially when it is combined with fear. Courage is presented as being a central virtue, and Screwtape proclaims despair is a greater sin than any of the sins which provoke it. 30th Screwtape letter. Main themes: moderate fatigue, false hopes, and what's real. Screwtape complains that Wormwood's last report was miserably inadequate. Wormwood could only report some very minor bad behavior. The patient is very fatigued, but that isn't very useful. Instead, a moderate fatigue is a better soil for the devils. False hopes are especially useful as a means to exploit the milder fatigue. The way to twist real is detailed by Screwtape as he contrasts the physical facts and the emotional effect. Here's a summary of the 31st Screwtape letter. Main theme: all is lost for Wormwood. The patient has been killed, so Wormwood has failed his mission. Screwtape clarifies how much he loves Wormwood in his own twisted way. The patient had a sudden clearing of his eyes as he went to heaven. Screwtape complains that hell's intelligence department has yet to figure out what God is really up to. Here's a summary of the toast essay from my book, C.S. Lewis Goes to Hell. Main themes: great saints make great sinners, twisting meaning of democracy, virtual abolition of education. This is a speech given by Screwtape as part of an annual event at the Tempters Training College that Dr. Slubgob oversees. Screwtape is quick to point out that their feast has been of pretty poor quality souls. Although the quality is not great, the quantity is. While there are a few great sinners, that also means there are less great saints. After giving a history lesson of how they averted the threat of something like a really healthy state of society, Screwtape describes how it was achieved. A central reason was their success in twisting the meaning of the word democracy to actually destroy democracies. This is achieved partly by promoting "I'm as good as you," which would never be said by a person who actually believes it. Screwtape says this mindset can be used to infect the educational system so dunces and idlers will not be made to feel inferior. Before the surprise of some old vintage Pharisees being brought out to feast upon, Screwtape notes that the destruction of individuals is more important than the fate of nations. Find more insights into the Screwtape letters with my enhanced study guide, C.S. Lewis Goes to Hell. Kindle Unlimited members get the Kindle version for free. Otherwise, it's just $5.99. Paperback is $17.